After joining in the round, you are ready to begin your ribbing. The tail and the working yarn are attached to your right needle. We will not use the tail anymore, so if yours is long, feel free to trim it. Just make sure to leave at least 8 inches. Grab a stitch marker and place it on your right needle. This signifies the beginning of a row. With the working yarn behind the right needle, we're going to knit our first stitch. So insert the right needle up into the first stitch on the left needle. Your needles will crisscross with the right needle behind the left needle. Then wrap your working yarn counterclockwise around the right needle, coming in between the two needles. Bring your right needle towards you and down through the loop on the left needle, making sure the working yarn you just wrapped around the right needle stays tightly wrapped around it. And then push the loop that's still on the left needle up and off the left needle. If necessary, you can pull your working yarn slightly to tighten. Now to purl, bring the working yarn between the two needles to the front. Insert the right needle down into the first stitch on the left needle. Your needles will crisscross with the right needle in front of the left needle. Wrap your working yarn counterclockwise around the right needle, coming in between the two needles. Then push your right needle up and away from you through the loop on the left needle, again making sure to keep the working yarn wrapped around it tightly. And lastly, push the loop on the left needle up and off the needle. Then to knit, bring the working yarn between the two needles so that it's behind the right needle. You're going to continue alternating between knits and purls across the row. Continue to alternate knits and purls until the end of the row. On the first row, before the last stitch, you will encounter the tail. This can confuse people, but just leave it as is. The last stitch of your row should be a purl. You have finished your first row. Move your stitch marker from the left to right needle and start another row. Make sure the working yarn is behind the right needle for your first stitch, which is a knit stitch. After completing 4 rows, your ribbing will look like this. You can count the V's to see how many rows you've done. When you are at the beginning of the row, you will always start by knitting 2 stitches. It's important to make sure that your working yarn is behind the right needle when you're knitting. So here it is behind the right needle. So start off by knitting 2 stitches. Here's the first stitch, and then you'll knit the second stitch. Once you knit 2 stitches, bring your working yarn between your 2 needles to the front of your right needle. Then purl the next 2 stitches. So here I'm purling the first stitch. And then I'm purling the second stitch. Continue alternating between knitting 2 stitches, then purling 2 stitches across the row. Make sure the working yarn is behind the right needle when knitting and in front of the right needle when purling. Here I am approaching the end of the row. The last 2 stitches of the row should always be purl stitches. So I have 3 stitches left in the row. This one is a knit stitch, and then these last 2 stitches are purl stitches. So I'm making sure to bring the working yarn to the front of the right needle, and then I'll purl these last 2 stitches. Once I finish the row, I will bring the working yarn behind the right needle and will move the stitch marker from the left to right needle, signifying the beginning of a new row. As I mentioned earlier, the first 2 stitches of every row should be knit stitches. So I'm knitting these first 2 stitches and I'll continue across the row, purling the next 2 and alternating knit 2, purl 2.